the bigger question for me then is, why would you hire someone who wasn't an A player? Why would you force someone to play by different rules than another employee? And I think it should challenge a lot of the, this is the biggest thing when it comes to remote work and the pushback against it. It's like, why do we do the things that we do? Well, a lot of times when really it comes down to it, the argument for return to office is a lot about just like control and having control over outputs.
Initiating becoming a hiring machine sequence in 3, 2, 1.
Hey everyone, it's Sam Keenly and welcome back to Becoming a Hiring Machine. This is the show dedicated to fixing recruitment by going beyond saying what needs to change and instead teaches you how to make that change. Today, we've got a great trending topics episode ahead of us, but before we get into that, I just want to tell you a little bit about the show. Essentially, we've got shows within the show here. Some days we have interviews with industry thought leaders and others who are shaking up the space. Other days like today, we cover trending topics, items that recruiters are talking about or will be very soon and what those mean for them. Stop by every Tuesday. We've got a Tactical Tuesday episode where you're going to learn how to go deep on something that will help you drive better results in your day-to-day. Every once in a while, we open it up for Q&A. Listeners can drop in questions that they'd like to hear us take on, so send those to us at podcast@loxo.co. And occasionally you'll hear Matt drop in for a mic drop episode where he shares something that he's been thinking about within the recruitment space and wants you to know. Today's trending topic, 34 big ideas that will change our world in 2024. Talk about a headline. So my favorite part, this came from LinkedIn and the estimated reading time on it is 34 minutes. I'm just like, yeah, we're probably not going to, read that whole thing, but that's what we're here for, right? So we're going to pull out a handful of these that you really need to know about the article. So predictions about things like the gig economy, to return to work, to what AI will be used for and its next adoption. So we're going to hit on those predictions and then translate what you need to know about within the recruitment space from that. So to make that even more special, we have Lex Winship, our own head of brand and content, joining us to lead this trending topic discussion. So Lex, welcome. You ready to lead this one?
I'm ready. But I will start with a disclaimer because LinkedIn themselves started with this disclaimer. These are predictions and humans are notoriously bad at making predictions. We predict a lot of things and maybe about 10% of them come true. So this is all kind of just talk, but there is a reason that these predictions are being made. And at the end of the day, I think the way that they put it is predictions expand our sense of what's possible. And I like that. It's very aspirational. So these are predictions. It's kind of, these could happen within a year. They could happen within the next decade. We don't know, but they're interesting things to start thinking about and just kind of, be looking ahead.
Yeah, I love it. Aspirational. Don't hold us accountable to it. They're aspirational.
Exactly.
All right, let's get into it.
Okay, so the first one that we're going to pull out here is around the gig economy, which you mentioned. They summarize it as wanted, a 35% CFO. So the idea here is, we've seen the gig economy come for, taxi drivers, food delivery, a lot of just kind of knowledge workers in general too. Now we've seen with writers, with designers, there's a lot of that kind of like freelance gig economy happening, but there is a rise in demand for fractional C-suite executives. And that's just kind of the next interesting iteration of that trend in general. There's a lot of interesting implications there too. So the way that they summarize it is a slowdown in VC funding in recent years has meant that startups have to work with less cash and longer runways. And often they need these C-suite executives to earlier in the game to help them burn less cash. So there's this interesting dilemma of finding the right people and bringing them on board. And it's kind of creating this new structure of work for startups that want to kind of ramp up quickly. So,
yeah. Oh, that's interesting. So one of these, it was kind of like the pros and cons of it, right? So the pros are, it's like, well, you used to not be able to afford these types of people. Now you can have access to those senior resources. Cons are your product, your service, your industry, your market, your niche, whatever is so unique that can you afford to have a part-time fractional person in there if they don't fully immerse themselves in it? So that's where, it's like, how do you balance? I was thinking about this, like what dynamics are at play. So it's like, how fast do you need to grow if you are a startup? What kind of expertise do you need within that role? Is it senior level? Is it industry, institutional, niche knowledge? Or do you possibly not really need like an internal CFO? Sometimes you just need someone to do the books and be like, hey, you're burning way too fast. So those are some things that you might want to think about. And I was talking to an executive recruiter about something similar to this the other week that I think actually ties in really well. So they were working on a new offer and who they were planning to target with it. And so a lot of us was like financial leaders, ironically enough. And so they said their first segment they're going after was in-house small to medium-sized companies, anywhere from like 25 to $500 million in revenue. And the reason being was they don't have the sophistication needed to make that type of hire yet. So they're like, we don't know how to hire these people. Come help us. Pretty straightforward.
Yeah.
The other side was in-house large enterprise companies like 500 to $1 billion revenue who have the sophistication, but their process is so intensive that they can only do it with the C-suite, but they want to be able to get to VP, director, and everything else.
Yeah.
So those were two interesting use cases. But where this ties in with this discussion that had me thinking was, I asked him, I'm like, why aren't you focusing on startups or VC portfolios? Because to me, these organizations can't afford to make a bad hire. Like they don't have the money, they don't have the runway to afford that. So I guess that's kind of where it opens up this question is this where that fractional type role comes into play? Like, or, sometimes you see it like the interim titles where it's kind of like it's a contract, it's a set amount of time that either ends with, hey, we're done after 7-12 months, or it turns into a full-time hire.
Yeah, it's super interesting because I feel like all of the questions and concerns and cons about freelancing in general just become amplified when you're talking about someone who's operating at an executive level and has a lot of impact on the future of the organization, the current priorities. And I think there's so many implications when it comes to like workplace culture and just the things that we prioritize, what makes a company. It starts to kind of break down a little bit the more people who are involved who are not full-time employees. And so it's this really interesting, like that's already starting to fracture within like on the lower level. But if that continues, what does that mean for the way that we work, for the way that we evaluate companies that we might want to work at, for the way that we are evaluated as employees? There's a lot of really interesting implications that I just am curious to see how it plays out. It's crazy to think about the fact that at some point, I don't remember what the philosophical principle is. I think it's called like the ship of Thesis or something, where it's like, okay, you take apart a ship and then rebuild it with all the same parts. Is it the same ship? When does it start to become a different thing entirely? And I think that that's the question that companies will start to have to ask themselves is like, okay, the people we hire are our company. Where are they? It's just really interesting.
Yeah. And even so, some companies think about this, they don't always put it in the job description, but when you really think about C-suite and high up, part of their job is recruiting at the end of the day and attracting talent.
Yeah.
So when you think of a lot of companies, you want to go work for them because they're visionary, they've got strong leaders. And if you're using fractionals only, well, does that become a selling point? Or it's like, well, they're fractional. I don't know how long they're going to be here. So that's another dynamic that, as you were explaining that, it had me thinking like, ooh, that, I don't know, I could see it as a potential con if you go that route.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's weird how individualistic we're becoming. I think it's good in so many ways of like, there used to be this kind of idea of like you identify with your work and with your company more than anything else. Now, millennials, especially Gen Z, like are starting to really move away from that. But there are some negative implications when it comes to culture and the things that are good to evaluate a company and a potential hire based off of. Now, it becomes the question of how much do you factor that in? How much do you weigh that? So it's kind of weird how this sounds simple, but there are a lot of kind of convoluted directions that this could go in. And it could be a good thing, but it could also be kind of bad. I don't know.
Yeah. So scenario plan it, prepare for both sides and think about what's best for your company.
Totally. But yeah, I think especially for recruiters, when it comes to how this could potentially have an implication on the way that they do their work. It's interesting to think about the ways that you would evaluate a potential fractional hire versus someone who is going to be there for the long haul, and just starting to kind of evaluate that and bring it into, the frame of mind.
Yeah. It's like contract to hire. You just start pitching more people that way.
Yeah.
So interesting. All right. Well, we'll come back next year this time. See how that prediction pans out.
Matched up. Yeah. I don't know. Okay. So number 2. This is an interesting one. LinkedIn predicts we will see the quiet rise of backdoor remote jobs. What is a backdoor remote job? There's a lot of job postings that will say this role is fully on site, But then when you actually start to talk to the hiring manager, you start to get really involved in the process. It's like, oh, actually, it doesn't have to be fully on site. We're open to remote. Oh, we could do a hybrid. And there's a little bit more flexibility and nuance than they let on in the job description. And one of the things that LinkedIn is predicting is in 2024, there's going to be even more of that gray area when it comes to certain employees that people want to bring into the mix versus certain that they maybe wouldn't make concessions for.
Mm-hmm.
And so there are a lot of potentially rocky kind of implications there. So the pros, of this are you could bring someone on who is the perfect fit for your company, but maybe isn't in the right place, isn't open to even, coming in full time or hybrid. But this is also going to be something that creates a lot of kind of resentment and competition within the company because, hey, why do I have to come into the office, but my peer doesn't? They live in California, So there's going to be some weird, I guess, legal and potentially just kind of anti-discrimination. Like there's a lot of different things that come into the mix here that companies are going to have to be very careful and wary of as they're starting to be flexible with this.
Yeah, ambiguity comes in, and this is something you and I are both thinking about a little bit. Well, obviously, like one, we're huge advocates for remote. Our company is fully remote based, but the reason why I think it's so powerful is because your talent pool isn't unlimited by a 10, 20, 30, 40, however many mile radius of people that aren't willing to commute. So when you expand that talent pool, you're now, if you have that constrained radius, the skill, you might be, willing to make a few concessions. But when you have a global talent pool, you can search for truly the best talent. And then it comes down to how well can you sell a job? How well can you make a compelling case? So one of the things that you noted that I'm curious to get your thoughts on is like defining an A player and why that comes into play. So tell me a little bit more about that.
Yeah, I think this becomes even more important as we start to, around remote work in general, but as we start to think about there are certain employees that you break the rules for. And I think that almost creating some rules around what does that employee look like? Who's the person that we would bend the rules for? That can help you make those decisions and have like a little bit of, if you codify that, you're kind of almost protecting yourself for the inevitable situation that occurs in which you get questioned on, okay, well, why make concessions for this person? And if you can define what an A player looks like and really justify the fact that this person is that, you're kind of backing up your logic of anything to get this person in the door. But I think the bigger question for me then is, why would you hire someone who wasn't an A player? Why would you bring someone, why would you force someone to play by different rules than another employee? And I think it should challenge a lot of the, this is the biggest thing when it comes to remote work and the, kind of pushback against it. It's like, why do we do the things that we do? Well, a lot of times when really it comes down to it, the argument for return to office is a lot about just like control and having control over outputs. But if you're bringing in A players, you don't really have to worry about that because A players perform wherever they are. So I think that that's a big part of the reason why the philosophy around hiring should always come from that perspective of, is this an A player? Is this someone that I can feel confident is going to produce wherever they are? All right, well then I don't need them in the office.
Yeah. And it's like, okay, well, if they're assembly line workers, yeah, you've got to be in the office, in the
Sure.
plant. But so much of the world is shifting to knowledge work. And so this is where it is like, sometimes it's like, hey, life's not fair. Sorry. I've always, that's the way that I skew a little bit, but it's because so many companies are now, you're measured by results, not activities. So especially if you are like looking for an executive leader or someone who's higher up, who's responsible for revenue at the end of the day or something else important, it's not something that, are they making 60 dials? Are they sending 27 emails? It's that. So if you have an independent, disciplined high performer, I'll take that all day over. I don't care where you work. You can go work from a truck stop for all I care, if that's the results that you're doing for our company. And in today's economy, as we all know, it's like you need to take every win that you can get to get ahead because it's not getting any easier right now.
Totally. Yeah, and I think that you bring up a good question or a good point of the fact that some roles have to happen in-house. And I think that there's a lot of understanding around that from the employee themselves. Like if they feel that it's important and justified for them to be in an office or in a workplace in general, I think there's an openness to that, or just
Hmm.
maybe even just like a sense of resignation about it. But I think the question when it really becomes interesting is like, okay, why do I have to be here? I don't. So why are you making me? And why are you making
Yeah.
me, but not them? And I think
Hmm.
it gets dicey very quickly. And one thing that they say in the article that I really liked was, if remote work is really going to work, it can't be viewed as a perk. It has to be available consistently to everyone. Because there is, as you said, life isn't fair, but there's a lot of resentment already brewing, even outside of just one company, but people being very just kind of competitive with each other about like,
Hmm.
oh, well, I get to work, I get all this, I got all that, da 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 da.
Yeah.
So
I think business leaders can solve for that though, because they're the ones that are setting those rules, right? Well, why are you making people go to the office? It's like, do they have to be there? It's like, yes, okay, for the manufacturing plants or something. But so many of them, like to me, I'd worked at a very large enterprise company before, and they invested a lot of money in a new headquarters, had kombucha on
mm,
tap, ping pong tables, arcade, all the different things. So no one predicted COVID was going to happen, and that completely changed the world. But like those companies have ridiculous overheads, right? Like how are they going to do that? So you justify it by making people use it, and so that's where I'm just like, is it just a sunk cost at that point? Hey, take your loss, sell it, or like start renting out a couple of the floors that you don't use anymore. Because that's where, if that's the difference between bringing in great talent or trying to justify that overhead, you got to think long term with some of that.
totally. Yeah, no, that's a really good point. It does become this idea of, all right, well, we already invested all of this in this, so now you guys just have to show up. It's like, okay, well,
Yeah. All right. So prediction: do we agree, disagree? Do we think backdoor remote work is going to be here to stay?
I think it's going to be a thing that happens in this weird murky gray area of like
Mm-hmm.
the battle over remote work. I think that hopefully by the end of 2024, we figured out a path forward that's transparent, at least, at the
Yeah,
very least. So I don't know. I think this one actually could be an accurate prediction for 2024.
I'm with you. Okay.
Okay. All right. Moving on to number 3. This one also interesting. And of course, in a list of predictions for 2024, AI had to come up. It will come up multiple times. No one's surprised. But this one is an interesting one. ChatGPT's hype will fade as a new generation of tailor made bots rises up. So obviously, 2023, you couldn't get anywhere without ChatGPT coming up. It's very generalized. It's very high level. It's just like the conversation around AI has kind of existed in this higher plane. The prediction here is that in 2024, AI will still be obviously the talk of the town, but it will become a little bit more narrow and specialized. You're already starting to see this happen. These kind of more niche chatbots, niche AI tools in
Mm-hmm.
general. So basically, they're predicting that this will now trickle into more concrete use cases. Legal bots like Harvey will assist lawyers with discovery, super interesting. Bots embedded in document storage platforms will allow workers to talk with their PDFs. For entertainment, a variety of specialized characters will help people eat, work out, and laugh. So there's just this really interesting idea of, okay, we've talked about AI at this high level, but ChatGPT is not the end all be all. There's so many more different avenues that we can start to explore
Mm-hmm.
this, and some already are exploring it. Subtle plug.
Subtle plug, yeah, because it's like ChatGPT was built for the every person, right? It's like here's one. It's ChatGPT is a subset of large language models. So as you were giving the hint, hint, wink, wink, it's like, yeah, we're absolutely going to brag on our product and engineer team because they spotted this earlier. And like, why would we use that? We can build our own that's built for recruiters. It's going to take in things like the job, the company, the job description, all of that, and actually help create messages tailored to that, not just, go over to ChatGPT, like write a business development email for me. It's like, well, it knows nothing about you. So it's gonna be like, hi, great to meet you. Do you want to like use my services and not be helpful? So where I'm most curious though is, I mean, it's like any software really. It's like, what's the adoption of this going to be? Because there's going to be so many options. Like, yeah, we built one for recruitment, but they're popping up left and right now. So when there's 10, 20, 100 different bots that you could choose to write your outreach sequence, like which are you going to choose? Is it the best? Are they going to start having costs to them? And what I think it's going to be is just a different flavor of the same problem where it's like, this is software today. There's so many options out there. It's how are you going to incorporate it as part of your workflow? Is it plug in natively? Are you going to have to import, export, copy and paste over? So I think that's where it'll get really interesting is how are they able to connect the dots to actually make things easy, fit into your natural workflow versus like, oh, jump over here and do this, where it's like, oh, it's better, but it's not making my life any easier or speeding things up.
Well, and I think there's the issue of quality in general.
Yeah.
Everyone's clamoring to create something right now because they know this is the next big thing. Again, subtle plug for Loxo. Even before this trend started, we've been investing in this, and you see decisions like that pay off when, just 2 months ago, the OpenAI, scandal, if you want to call it that, Sam Altman's outing and reinstating and all of that, there were some quality issues that came out of that when it comes to ChatGPT's performance. So there's this level of, it's nice to be able to take quality in-house, but then you're also held accountable to that. And I think a lot of companies, they have big ideas about how they can solve a problem, but they don't really know how to execute on that and how much manpower it takes, how much time. Our engineers are constantly hard at work on this. I've never seen a system like this before. And so I think that there's that element of, there's going to be a lot of really not so great AI solutions out there that we're going to hopefully start to be able to weed those ones out fairly quickly. But this is where social selling will come into play big time. There's going to be a lot of tool vetting that's happening. And I think there's going to be experts and like voices that kind of rise to the top that people will go to trust. And we're going to have to be able to be sure that those people are trustworthy. There's a lot of questions that come out of that as well, when there's something to gain for advocating for a product. And yeah, hopefully we can start to see those people, those voices take shape and feel that they're trustworthy, especially, across each of those niches.
Yeah, I really want to. I mean, this is everything. Do you really use the product? Show me, show me
Exactly.
how successful you are. Cause what was it with all of the Bitcoin stuff where it was like all the celebs were endorsing these platforms.
Yeah.
I just wonder, it's like, were you really using it, or were you just paid to say it because you have a platform? So I don't know. I think this is getting a little bit more meta as we're starting to question, do the influencers actually use this? Do they actually know how to use it to drive results? Or is it, the company with the fattest check is the one who gets the voice from them?
Exactly. I mean, I think that is an important question, though, to consider when it comes to, the rise of the creator economy in general and how that's starting to become more of a factor in B2B. These things should be things that we're critical of and that we question. I think it's good that we are moving to this model of more social selling in general, but we have to know that we can trust each other. And I think there has to be some form of accountability for that. One thing that I am curious about, though, is how this might, thinking through the creator economy in general and how a lot of D2C brands have leaned into co-branding and kind of collaborative type partnerships. I'm wondering if this will start to happen more in the B2B space as a result of all of these niche chatbots and niche AI tools kind of popping up. Is this going to be something where co-branding is one of the ways that we have some sense of accountability and validity to things? I don't know. It's interesting to think about. I've seen a little bit more of just whispers of that, I guess, lately. And I'm curious to see if that kind of takes off at all.
Yeah, I could see it. It definitely help bridge that trust issue gap there that we were talking about.
Yeah.
But because that's the other part of it, is it's so tough to if they actually use it. I don't know, maybe the co-branding, there's content that shows it. I don't know, maybe we crack that one ourselves and try to figure it out.
Maybe. Stay tuned. So what do you think? 2024 prediction, yay or nay?
I mean, we're already seeing it happen where people are building their own ChatGPT. It's absolutely going to happen. I think it's like you say, it's the quality side and the adoption. At the end of the day, that's where, is it going to be here to stay, or is it just going to burn fast and fizzle out?
And I think another thing people will have to consider and do some research on is a lot of people are going to be saying, we've created this tool, but really they're just integrating with ChatGPT or using, riding the coattails of something else. So there's going to be a lot probably of false claims or just kind of, vague claims. And so kind of needling through all of that will be another challenge for the consumer. It always falls back on us.
Okay. And you said something that's really important there. Are you creating the tool or are you training the tool? Because if you're creating it, you have the power to evolve it over time. If you're training it, you're at the mercy of whoever created it, and that could completely change. So, okay. I like that little nuance.
Okay. So the next one, number 4, FOBO, aka fear of being obsolete, will force employers to the bargaining table. This one I think is really interesting. So this year, obviously, was a big year for strikes. There was the Hollywood writers' strike, Starbucks baristas, I think nurses, factory workers, teachers. There's been so many strikes. I think they said nearly 500,000 workers participated in mass walkouts throughout the US only in 2023. But picket lines were also cropping up in the UK, Canada, Iceland, and across Europe. So big year for strikes, especially this summer. But one underlying theme of all of these strikes was this FOBO, as LinkedIn calls it. I'd never heard that term before. But as AI does become so prevalent, there's the question of, okay, well, are we still relevant? Will I still have a job? Is this thing coming to take my job? So there's this kind of give and take that's happening now between employers and employees of, okay, how do we upskill to not be replaced? And whose responsibility is it to provide opportunities for upskilling? So I think they're calling it, the great bargaining. It's an interesting one.
This one's tough. I totally see both sides of it, and that's why. Two camps will come out of this. You'll have the employees, the strikers, who say it's a responsibility of an organization to help them upskill so that they can use that new technology that is going to replace them. Then you have the employers who say it's a responsibility of an individual to upskill themselves to make them the top individual for that position. So it depends on which side. Like, are you an individual contributor? Are you a manager? Are you a company owner? I think that's kind of what's going to lead some of those camps. But this is not anything new. I would say, like, go back to history and learn from it. Think about Henry Ford and the new cars. What happened to horse-drawn carriage drivers when Ford rolled out the first car? Like, those drivers had to figure it out. Did they just become regular car drivers? Not a regular driver. They weren't regular drivers to them then. They were driving these crazy spaceships, but they were, forced to adapt. I mean, at the end of the day, so whose responsibility was that? Did Ford train them? Did those individuals learn how to drive the car? I mean, there's countless examples of innovations like this where it just breaks traditional jobs and skills, and that's exactly what innovation is. So I mean, I always hate to, like, not take a side in either one of these, but it's like both camps are ultimately going to be responsible for how this shakes out, right? So employers, it's going to be a huge miss for them if they just phase out employees who have years of company, industry, job experience, and they're just like, okay, bye, see, you don't want to learn. It's like, that's a lot of knowledge that they've got right there that you just let walk out the door. But employees need to increase their value by learning new skills. So and this is going to rabbit hole a little bit, but go to any corporate training. It's boring. It's awful. Like, you just can't wait. You're staring at that clock and you're like, has it only been like 10 seconds? You wish that it passes on because it regresses to the average person and how they want to teach. So I think the ideal scenario here is that employers are going to recognize that it's more affordable and makes more business sense to keep your existing team members, but you need to let people learn in the way that they learn best. So it's like, is it giving them a learning stipend or like a week to just go off and do something on their own? Let them learn that skill set that you want them to learn to upskill. But I think that's where it's going to be tough, because it's like, there's no one party that should be responsible. Both should be at the end of the day. And if it just turns into this finger pointing battle and no work's going to get done anywhere.
Totally. And I think that there is the whole conversation around the fear element of it all that a lot of people just lean into. Is this going to replace me? And instead of focusing that energy on learning how to use AI to become more efficient, learning how to, developing new skills, there is a lot of just, finger pointing, like you said. And I think I understand it 100%. Content is my bread and butter. And that is something that many people would say, yeah, we can outsource that to AI. A robot could do it. So there's the conversation around, one, what do we value? Soft skills, I think, will become infinitely more important in the next few years because people crave humanity. And yes, I know AI is extremely talented and can replicate human emotion in so many different ways, but there is something just to be said for human to human connection, especially at work. So those intangibles, I think, will become even more important. We already hire based off of intangibles. We already, work based off of them. So this isn't something new, but I think it will become more important. And I think that it will become more of a differentiator for employees specifically. But I also think employees who invest energy, like their own time, in learning these new skills and technologies will become the next, the future generation. And those will become the A players. Those will become the people that really people want to work with. There is a conversation, actually, we were talking about this the other day. I follow this email called Exploding Topics. And one of the ones that came up was prompt generating, and just how the skill of being able to give AI good prompts is becoming this extremely valuable skill set that people would hire based off of that alone. And so there's so many opportunities to kind of learn something new and use that to your advantage. And there's a lot of opportunity right now specifically that I think a lot of people aren't taking advantage of because they're just afraid. And I get it, but we've got to keep moving.
Yeah.
So,
Yeah. And I think at the end of the day, I mean, it's anything. Is AI going to take my job? Is this technology going to replace me? The thing that always keeps you there is, I found the delineation is, if it's something that's being done, that can be replaced. But if it's thinking, like thinking
mhm.
cannot be replaced. It's all output, and how efficient can it be? So if you can think, you're going to keep your job. There's always going to be that need. If it's doing, it's like, well, technology can do those things faster, but it needs the thinking input, like you said. And so prompt engineering is a perfect point of that. It's like AI, it can never come, well, it could probably come up with prompts. I've heard of people using like ChatGPT to prompt Midjourney and everything else. But again, it's, yeah, talk about AI into
But also
becoming
that's a
like
creative use
inception.
case. You know, that's
Yeah.
one of those things where it's like creativity has become infinitely more valuable, in my opinion. And as a self-professed creative, I love that because I feel like there are more opportunities now for me to create without limits than there ever have been before. I'm not a talented designer by any means, but I have a lot of ideas. And so being able to outsource the creation piece of the puzzle to a tool that was designed to do so is actually really helpful for me. So there
Yeah.
are positive spins and like ways to look at this if we do dig in. But again, it's complicated and some people will lose their jobs because of AI replacing them. And so that's a very real concern and a very real thing to battle with. But again, like you said, there's precedent for this all throughout history, and it's a sad, hard fact of life. But as we evolve, so does the way that we work.
Yeah. And the world's not going to stop for you, whether you like it or not. And so one of the things that Matt always comes back to is he's just like, if you have the growth mindset, you'll be fine. You're going to be in the top 5%. So retain that, continue to want to push, and you shouldn't have to worry.
Yeah. It's scary though.
Dun, dun, dun. I need to watch iRobot tonight now.
Okay. The next one. I mean, I think we can both agree that that's not even a prediction, honestly. It's
No.
more so just kind of the state of things
Yeah.
as of now.
Life.
They threw that one in as an easy win for them. Okay, so the fifth prediction here that we're going to cover is also AI related. Employers will combat job applicants' use of AI with more AI. So this is an interesting one of, generative AI has been used increasingly to create resumes, to create cover letters, to actually apply to jobs. There are so many ways that applicants are using AI. And now, in order to fight back against potentially just getting like spammed almost, companies are using AI to determine when AI has been used to apply to a job and then kind of like dinging people for that.
Mm-hmm.
So it's kind of this weird irony and hypocrisy that's happening of we're allowed to use this, but you're not. So there's this conversation that's kind of coming into play. One thing that I think is really interesting is around just AI has been proven to be just as biased as humans are. And so there are some PR and legal risks to using this method of having AI weed out employees for you and having that, like them having technology make these decisions for you. I'm trying to remember, I think there's a study from Reuters, 85% of large US employers are currently using some form of automation to screen and rank candidates. 85%. That's crazy.
I believe it. And that's before AI even comes into play. Like people are already using automation and everything else to get through that. So I don't know. I think I see it from, again, I hate saying both sides. Like, it's hard to get a job out there right now. Like I totally get that and empathize with that. But at the same time, you're doing yourself a disservice if you're just mass applying. Like recruiters have seen it time and again, like the LinkedIn Easy Apply, you post a job 8 p.m. on Monday night, you go in at Tuesday morning at 9 a.m. and you've somehow got like 747 candidates. It's like, what? How? Because all it takes is a click of a button. So this is where it gets tricky. But I think that if you're willing, if you really want a job or like if you really enjoy the company and you're really being mindful about it, all this noise is actually going to help top candidates rise to the top more visibly. I think if you go above and beyond the normal application process, in all honesty, at this point, it's easy apply through LinkedIn or whatever it is, like a nominal amount of just that tiny bit of effort is going to set you apart from others, which it's kind of sad when you think about it. But at the same time, it makes it a lot easier for the recruiter to go about that. So they're probably like, cool, thanks. Like all of that. So when I was hiring earlier this year, one of the things I said was, it was for like a creative position. And I said, like, here's the application. It was a very standard, just like name, details, like resume. And then I said, please include a link to your portfolio. Very standard question for creative. I think about 15% of the applications included that, which was crazy. And like, again, it's not asking anything absurd.
Yeah.
So to one point, I think that was like some people were just going in and tossing in a quick application for it. But two, I was like, all right, well, that just whittled down who I have to go and look at from that standpoint. So that same process, I think, can be applied to if people are doing, the easy apply or other things. Just, I know recruiters say they hate cover letters. I personally am a fan of a cover letter, just because one, it's extra effort, not even extra effort. It's just like showing they actually want to do it. Even if, again, if it's just like taking 3 extra seconds and they go into ChatGPT and like, write a cover letter for this company. Like, hey, at least they did that little bit more. It's going to help screen them past the others. But this morning I even opened up my LinkedIn DMs, and there was a candidate who had reached out and said, like, hey, I just applied for one of your customer success manager positions. Like, really excited about it. Like, wasn't even to the hiring manager, but I was like, hey, like, love this. I'm going to pass that along because I don't know how many candidates we've gotten, but I've only seen one of those. So again, that's bringing a bright light to someone who's willing to just think a little bit more and show that proactiveness. So all in all, it's like you can use AI to fight back or to just bring it back to the human element. One thing that MJ Smith, who we both worked with before, she's just like, I had in a small step the application process for an applicant that they can't finish or they can't use AI to auto apply. So it's like we said earlier, for creatives, add a link to your portfolio, or more general roles, just like asking questions. What are you most proud of? What's something interesting that you've learned lately? Or like, we enjoy work-life balance here. Like, share a hobby you've got. Like, again, those small things, but if 9 out of 10 people aren't willing to fill that in, it's like, cool. Well, that's a reflection. Like, if you're applying for a job, that's a reflection of what your work level and output is going to be like. At least that's what you're trying to tell them if that's what you're applying for. So it's like, well, why would I want somebody who's going to do the bare minimum if not that? So I think there's ways around it, and you don't have to use AI and then get into all that legal mess that would ensue. But
Well, and I feel like to your point, there are ways for candidates to get around this, but then there's also the element of employers make certain steps way more confusing and complicated than they need to. And so if you reduce some of the redundancies, like, okay, I have to upload my resume, but then I also have to manually input all of my experience, reduce those redundancies, make that super simple, and make it easy for—
Get a better ATS.
Get a better ATS? I don't know. Wink. But, you take some of those redundancies out of the picture, and then you open up this opportunity for true A players to really rise to the top, because there's the complicated issue of, one, people want a job. And so they are feeling the desperation of, I'm just going to apply to as many jobs as I can. I don't care where I work as long as I'm working, and there's that side of things. And then there's also the side of, okay, we want amazing candidates to feel like it's worth their time to apply here. And so I think that's where that give and take comes into the mix, is like, how can we really, really make our hiring process as frictionless as possible in the ways that attract people, but then add friction in strategic points where we use it to our advantage to find those top tier candidates. So there's a lot of inefficiencies that can be taken out of the equation in order to make it easier for really, really outstanding candidates to apply, and they will.
Yeah, I love that. I want us to set up a poll and put it on LinkedIn for like how many people stopped an application process because you uploaded your resume, nothing carried over. It's like every time I go into a doctor's office and you have to pre-fill out all the information, and then they fill out this like 7 forms. I'm like, you literally have all that information. You just asked me for those cards that you took a picture of and put into your system. Like, this is so repetitive and duplicative. Like, pick one or the other. It's the same thing with the hiring process. So I'm actually really curious now. Let's put a note to do that. Yeah.
Just yesterday on LinkedIn about, I totally dropped out of this hiring process because it was making me do redundant steps that I just don't have time for. And this is, a person that I'm connected to who is an amazing hire. I would say anyone should hire this person. So there's that issue that comes into play, and candidates and employers are both going to have to be very strategic about the application process, essentially.
Oh, this is a hot one. Okay.
Oh, I like this one. All right, poll is incoming. But on that one, prediction, I think we can say that's a yes on that one too.
Yeah, safe bet.
Safe bet. All right, our final prediction for the day. Number 6. This one's really interesting as well. expect an unretirement wave in 2024. So, this is really sadly not surprising in some ways, but then also kind of an interesting opportunity in others. Research shows that the majority of baby boomers expect to work until they physically can't anymore. Meanwhile, 1 in 5 Americans who have already retired are considering returning to work, according to a recent survey. Wow. I mean, there's a lot to unpack there for sure.
I get it. Part of me. So I think this is one that's going to be totally like personality driven of the individual, and well, personality driven, economic driven will be the two factors.
Yeah.
So economic, pretty straightforward. Like if you're not able to afford cost of living, not able to support family, like yeah, you're going to have to go back to work to make a living in some way. I think the personality side is where it's going to be really, really interesting, because I've seen this as like our parents' generation is real, like they've been in retirement for now, and I've seen it for a handful of years. And what it comes down to with these conversations is like people want to have a purpose. Your purpose is usually it's like, your health, your family, and your work are the three things that you really control at the end of the day. And a lot of people do get a big sense of purpose from their work, especially if they're empty nesters. Kids are old enough now. I get it. Like if there's not a lot going on. So where it'll be interesting to see this on retirement is the types of jobs that they do go back into from this subset of people. Are they going back into the corporate job? I don't see them becoming, just your standard desk worker, but do they go to like a local brick and mortar shop, to like your local coffee store? Are they a part-time employee or an employee or volunteer at a nonprofit? One that I would be really interested in, as I was thinking more through this, is like a lot of people have mentors, right? They're people who are 5-10 years ahead of you in your career, where I could honestly see this group. We were talking about fractional stuff earlier, right?
Yeah.
Like think about if they go back to work as an advisor in a very specific industry, job function, something like that, because while technology, tactics, all of those are always going to change, like the general principles should remain pretty consistent. And these individuals have decades of experience within these spots. So they've encountered the problems you're going to face. They've seen the solutions that did or didn't work out. You can't even call them solutions if they didn't work out. But I wonder if I'm just thinking to myself, like, if I know people who want to go back to work, I'd be like, this is how you position yourself. Do this route instead.
Yeah.
But I guess circling back to like that fractional role, I could see this being a great way of, it's like, think about way back in the days you had your elders in the community that you'd always go to for advice and everything. Like that doesn't exist in today's world anymore, sadly, or at least in like the Western world. So maybe it comes full circle.
Yeah, I really do feel like that is a thing that our generation has missed out on a lot, is intergenerational dynamics in your life in general are so positive and also just very perspective shifting, which I think is just always a good experience to have as a human. My first job out of college was at a nonprofit supporting the school district. And I was the youngest person working there by 30 years. I'm not even kidding. And it was the best. It was so fun. First of all, I had like these amazing older women who were just mentoring me, pouring into me, taught me so much about work, but then also just about life. And like you said, that life experience is so invaluable. And I hate that we've kind of devalued it in pursuit of more technology, more efficiency, more all of that. It's like, okay, that stuff all matters, but there is something good about the old way too. And there's so much that we can learn about the processes and just the intention and really the philosophy behind why we do the things that we do in the way that we do them. So I love the idea of there being more intergenerational dynamics in the workplace in general. So yeah, from a consulting standpoint, that's amazing. Fractional advisor roles, there's so much in that world. But then I love the point that you made too of maybe it's not leveraging the skills that you really mastered throughout your career. Maybe it's kind of moving into this more community-based role of working in the coffee shop or, working as my mom was recently in the hospital, and there was a woman whose job was just to come around and like talk to the people who are staying in the hospital and she brought like Uno cards and magazines and all of these like little snacks and stuff. And it made my mom's day. Those are things that there's a lot of opportunity out there to kind of get creative.
And it gives that person purpose. Like they love that.
Exactly. Yeah. And anything that kind of brings people out of the house and brings them more into their community and like interacting with each other, I think is really good. Another group that there's been some conversation about, and we actually sent this out in our newsletter last month, veterans. I'm trying to remember, Forbes said over 200,000 military personnel who transition into civilian life and civilian work every year, 200,000 veterans. And so there's a lot of transferable skills there. So it's interesting to think about people leveraging the skills, even the soft skills that they've learned throughout their career or throughout their like primary source, and then applying it elsewhere. So could be interesting to see how that plays out. For the people who want that, it's exciting and fun, but then there's also the dynamic of, dang, it's the prospect of having to work until you die if you don't want to is it's sad and scary. And I think like, obviously at a higher level, there are things that need to be figured out there so that doesn't have to be the case. The cost of living should not be so high, but that's above our pay grade.
Yeah. Different podcasts can tackle that one. We'll stay on the recruiting side of it.
But yeah, for recruiters, I think that this will be an interesting opportunity to think outside the bounds of what you typically would hire for. There are people who have life experience and skill sets that can be leveraged in really creative ways. So I think the biggest call here is not taking things at face value, which is obviously difficult when it's a very competitive job market. But I think that is something that we should always hold ourselves accountable to is, okay, how can I think outside the box here and like see the individual for who they are and what they could bring to the table, not necessarily just the things that are on their resume.
Yeah. And that's like, I know ageism is definitely becoming a thing. It's like, well, you're clearly just looking at their years of experience relative to like a certain technology or their ability to adapt it and be like, I would rather look at them from a standpoint of their ability to solve for a problem. And I can guarantee you they've got way more experience than most of the other people. So yeah, it's unfortunate. It's like, who cares if they can type 100 words a minute or 10 words a minute? Like, you want the knowledge that they have and the ability to coach a team. And yeah, they can work with other people who can take advantage of technology better. But again, going back to like the ability to think and solve, that's what the long-term mindset should be for companies that want to be in business 5, 10, 20 years from now.
Exactly. I'd love a little power duo of an older person and then their mentee who's fresh out of college and is an AI whiz. They just synthesize all of the information that the older mentor is giving them. It's cute. I like it. It's heartwarming.
Ratatouille just came to mind with little chef inside his hat. That's exactly what I'm thinking of this.
Who's the little chef? The older person or the younger person?
Oh, the older person.
The older person.
Sure. Because they're like, I know all the recipes. Let me do that. I'm just going to use you because you've got the ability to move around and use the tech. But yeah, oh man, that's a meme waiting to happen. All right. Well, that was fun. Any last second things? Did we miss anything or did that cover most of them outside of the other, 28 we didn't get to?
Exactly. There's some others that warrant more discussion. So those will come in future episodes. But for today, that's the bread and butter there.
Perfect. I love it. Well, this was fun. This was good conversation, and I hope that it really gets recruiters thinking in some ways that they may not have before. So from here, all the fun, usual stuff, Becoming a Hiring Machine is a production of Loxo. You can find all of these show notes in your favorite podcast streaming platform, as well as on our website, loxo.co/podcasts. Full video episodes are available. We've got this thing on YouTube, on our website. If you have questions that you want to hear us, give our thoughts on, if you're looking for advice, you have a trending topic that you want us to cover, send those to us, podcast@loxo.co. So, all right, everyone. That was the show. That was a phenomenally fun Trending Topics episode with Lex. Until next time.